If you can recognize heart shapes on pediatric chest x rays, you can diagnose congenital heart diseases in seconds. In this video, I will simplify CVS x rays in pediatrics so that you never panic in exams or wards. Pediatric cardiovascular system is a high yield and frequently tested area in final year examinations. Understanding it becomes much easier when we approach it systematically, especially using basic investigations. Let's begin by looking at chest x-ray interpretation in pediatric cardiac conditions. So whenever I am asked to interpret a chest x-ray in the exam, I like to follow a fixed step-by-step approach because it helps me not miss anything. First, I quickly check what kind of an x-ray it is. Usually it is a plain x-ray, chest x-ray, and then the view, like whether it is AP, anteroposterior, or PA, that is posterior-anterior. In pediatrics, it is often an AP view, so I keep that in mind while assessing the heart size. Then I confirm the side by looking at the side marker and also relating it with the things like cardiac apex and the gastric bubble, which are on the left side. After that, I see if the film is technically adequate. I look at the exposure, whether it is properly centered, and whether it is taken in inspiration or expiration, because all these can change how the heart and lungs look. Once that's done, I go through the x-ray systematically from inside out, and only then do I start commenting on any abnormalities in a structured way. Using this approach, I will now interpret the pediatric cardiac chest x-rays. So the first one is a plain chest x-ray of a child taken in the anteroposterior view. The film appears to be adequately exposed and centered. On assessing the cardiac size, the heart appears to be normal in size. However, the cardiac contour is abnormal with an upturned apex, giving a boot-shaped appearance. On looking at the lung fields, there is decreased pulmonary vascularity, suggesting reduced pulmonary blood flow. So it is a normal-sized heart with a boot-shaped configuration and oligemic lung fields. The X-ray findings are most probably suggestive of tetralogy of Fallot. So now let's read this from the textbook. Tetralogy of Fallot. Among cyanotic CHDs, the tetralogy of Fallot has a relatively favorable natural history that allows survival beyond infancy in about 75% of cases. As a result, it is the most common cyanotic heart disease encountered beyond the age of 1 year, constituting almost 75% of all blue patients. The physiology is that of VSD with pulmonic stenosis, as described above. Anatomically, it is characterized by the classic tetrad: severe right ventricular outflow obstruction, a large VSD, aorta that overrides the VSD, and right ventricular hypertrophy. Multiple anatomical variations of TOF exist, which have a bearing on treatment. Hemodynamics. Physiologically, the pulmonic stenosis causes concentric right ventricular hypertrophy without cardiac enlargement and an increase in right ventricular pressure. When the right ventricular pressure is as high as the left ventricular or the aortic pressure, a right to left shunt appears to decompress the right ventricle. Once the right and left ventricular pressures have become identical, increasing severity of pulmonic stenosis reduces the flow of blood into the pulmonary artery and increases the right to left shunt. As the systolic pressures between the two ventricles are identical, there is little or no left to right shunt and the VSD is silent. The right to left shunt is also silent since it occurs at insignificant difference in pressure between the right ventricle and the aorta. The flow from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery occurs from pulmonic stenosis, producing an ejection systolic murmur. The more severe the pulmonic stenosis, the less flow into the pulmonary artery and bigger the right to left shunt. Thus, the severity of cyanosis is directly proportional to the severity of pulmonic stenosis, but the intensity of the systolic murmur is inversely related to the severity of pulmonic stenosis. The VSD of TOF is always large enough to allow free exit to the right to left shunt. Since the right ventricle is effectively decompressed by the VSD, congestive failure seldom occurs in TOF. The exceptions to this rule are anemia, infective endocarditis, systemic hypertension, right ventricular dysfunction from long-standing severe hypoxia, and aortic or tricuspid valve regurgitation. The right ventricular outflow obstruction results in a delay in the P2. Since the pulmonary artery pressure is reduced, the P2 is also reduced in intensity. The late and soft P2 is generally inaudible in TOF. The S2 is therefore single and audible sound in A2. Since the aorta is somewhat anteriorly displaced, the audible single A2 is quite loud. The ascending aorta in TOF is large and may result in aortic ejection click. On auscultation, the diastolic interval is completely clear in TOF as there is no third or fourth sound or a diastolic murmur. Concentric right ventricular hypertrophy reduces the distensibility of the right ventricle during diastole. The right atrial contraction at the end of diastole causes a relatively large A waves. Although the A waves are prominent in the jugular venous pulse, they are not too tall unless right ventricular dysfunction is present. Clinical features. Patients with TOF may become symptomatic any time after birth. Neonates as well as infants may develop anoxic spells. Paroxysmal attacks of dyspnea. Cyanosis may be present from birth or make its appearance some years after birth. The commonest symptoms are dyspnea on exertion and exercise intolerance. The patients assume a sitting posture, squatting, as soon as they get dyspneic. Although squatting is not specific for TOF, it is the commonest congenital lesion in which squatting is noted. Anoxic spells occur predominantly after waking up or following exertion. The child starts crying loudly, becomes dyspneic, bluer than before, and may lose consciousness. Convulsions may occur. The frequency varies from once in a few days to numerous attacks every day. Physical examination discloses cyanosis, clubbing, slightly prominent A waves in the jugular venous pulse, normal sized heart with a mild parasternal impulse, normal first sound, single second sound, and an ejection systolic murmur, which ends before the audible second sound. The electrocardiogram in TOF shows right axis deviation with right ventricular hypertrophy. The T waves are usually inverted in right precordial reeds. P pulmonale may be present but is uncommon. V1 may show pure R but transition to R by S complex occurs at V2. The chest X-ray shows a normal sized heart with an upturned apex suggestive of right ventricular hypertrophy. The absence of a main pulmonary artery segment gives it the shape of which is described as core N sabo. The aorta is enlarged and right aortic arch is present in 30% cases. The right aortic arch in a posterior-anterior thoracic Roentgenogram, that is X-ray, is easily recognized by its concave impression on the right side of trachea. The pulmonary fields are oligemic. The murmur shortens and the cyanosis increases with increasing severity of right ventricular outflow tract obstruction. Paroxysmal attacks of dyspnea can be present with mild as well as severe TOF. However, effort intolerance is directly related to the severity. Diagnosis. The diagnosis of TOF is confirmed by echocardiography. Cardiac catheterization is seldom necessary. Additional specific information required for surgical decision is also obtained through echocardiography. Cardiac catheterization or CT-MRI may be required in older children with limited echo windows and in selected specific circumstances. Associated aortopulmonary collaterals uncertainties in coronary artery anatomy. Course and complications. Patients with TOF are subject to many difficulties. The pulmonary stenosis becomes progressively severe with age. The dyspnea and increasing exercise intolerance limit the patient's activities. Each attack of anoxic spell is potentially fatal. Anemia, by decreasing the oxygen carrying capacity of blood, reduces the exercise tolerance still further. Patients are prone to infective endocarditis. Neurological complications occur frequently. Anoxic infarction in the central nervous system may occur during an anoxic spell and result in hemiplegia. Anemia increases the propensity towards strokes by reducing red blood cell deformability. Paradoxical embolism, this is important, to the central nervous system and venous thrombosis due to sluggish circulation from polycythemia can also result in hemiplegia. Brain abscess is not an infrequent complication. It should be suspected in any cyanotic patient presenting with irritability, headache, convulsions, vomiting, with or without fever, and neurological deficit. Treatment. The medical management of TOF is limited to prevention and management of complications and the correction of anemia. Oral beta blockers help prevent cyanotic spells. Maximally tolerated doses of propranolol ranging from 0.5 to 1.5 mg per kg per dose should be administered. Iron supplementation is recommended for all infants and young children with TOF. The management of anoxic spells is indicated in the table below. Management of hypercyanotic spells. Immediate steps. Check the airway, deliver oxygen by face mask or nasal cannula. Keep the child in a knee-chest position. Sedate with morphine, sodium bicarbonate at 1.2 ml per kg. Correct the hypovolemia at 10 ml per kg of dextrose normal saline. Transfuse packed red cell if anemic. Metoprolol is given at 0.1 mg per kg IV slowly over 5 minutes. Repeat every 5 minutes for maximum 3 doses. May be followed by infusion at 1 to 2 microgram per kg per minute. Monitor saturation, heart rates and blood pressure. Keep the heart rate below 100 per minute. Persistent desaturation, no significant improvement. Then consider vasopressor infusion. Methoxamine 0.1 to 0.2 mg per kg per dose IV or 0.1 to 0.4 mg per kg per dose IM or phenylephrine 5 microgram per kg as IV bolus and 1 to 4 microgram per kg per minute as infusion. If spells persist, paralyze the patient, electively intubate and ventilate. Plan for palliative or corrective surgery. Seizures are managed with diazepam at 0.2 mg per kg IV or midazolam at 0.1 to 0.2 mg per kg per dose IV. Following a spell, conduct a careful neurological examination, CNS imaging, if any focal deficits are present. Initiate therapy with a beta blocker at maximally tolerated dose. This helps improve resting saturation and decreases frequency of spells. Ensure detailed echocardiography for disease morphology. Plan early corrective or palliative surgery. Administer iron in therapeutic doses if anemic or prophylactic dose. Prevention of these spells. Counsel the parents regarding the possibility of recurrence of spells and precipitating factors like dehydration, fever, pain. Encourage early surgical repair. Definite surgery for TOF involves closure of the VSD and relief of the RVOT obstruction. Most surgeons today seek to avoid the transannular patch. This valve-sparing correction of TOF is often easier in infants. If the pulmonary valve annulus is very small, placement of a transannular patch across the pulmonary valve and the resultant severe pulmonary regurgitation is unavoidable. Although definitive operation is feasible in young infants, some centers opt for palliative options initially. This is typically done through the Blalock-Taussig shunt, which consists of a subclavian artery pulmonary artery anastomosis, subclavian artery pulmonary artery anastomosis, using a Gore-Tex graft. Alternatives include balloon dilation of the pulmonary valve or stenting of the patent arterial duct if present. In a few select instances, it may be possible to stent the RVOT as an initial palliation. A number of long-term concerns have emerged in the survivors of TOF repair 2 to 3 decades after the operation. These include heart failure and risk of ventricular tachyarrhythmias as a result of right ventricular dilation that results from chronic pulmonary regurgitation, as well as the scar on the right ventricle if ventriculotomy has been done during the operation. So now let's move on to the next X-ray. This is a plain chest X-ray of a child taken in the anterior-posterior view. The film appears to be adequately exposed and centered. On assessing the cardiac size, the heart appears markedly enlarged, mainly due to a hugely dilated right atrium. Looking closely at the cardiac contours, there is a prominent right atrial border, giving the characteristic box-shaped appearance. The lung fields show reduced pulmonary vascularity, suggesting a decreased pulmonary blood flow, which can occur due to the right-left shunting. Putting these findings together, that is massive right atrial enlargement, small functional right ventricle and oligamic lung fields, we can say that the X-ray is probably suggestive of Epstein's anomaly. So now let us read this from the textbook. Epstein anomaly, an unusual and rare cyanotic congenital heart disease with diminished pulmonary blood flow, results from an abnormality of the tricuspid valve. The posterior as well as the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve is displaced downwards to a variable extent. The result is an attachment to the posterior wall of the right ventricle. In addition, the leaflets are malformed and fused, resulting in obstruction to flow of blood into the right ventricle. The portion of the right ventricle above the leaflet attachment thins out and is called atrialization of the right ventricle. There is a particularly high prevalence of accessory pathways on the right side that result in high likelihood of re-entrant supraventricular tachycardia. Hemodynamics. The tricuspid valve anomaly results in obstruction to the forward flow of blood as well as the regurgitation of blood from the right ventricle into the right atrium. In addition, there is a large part of right ventricle that is atrialized as a result of downward displacement of tricuspid valve. This atrialized right ventricle contacts with the rest of the ventricle and does not allow effective forward flow into the pulmonary circulation. The right atrium progressively dilates to accommodate the extra volume. The foramen ovale may be patent or there is an atrial septal defect allowing a right to left shunt to occur. This results in cyanosis. The greater the tricuspid valve displacement, the more the cyanosis. Clinical features and diagnosis. Patients present with history of cyanosis, effort intolerance and fatigue. They may also give history suggestive of paroxysmal attacks of tachycardia. Cyanosis varies from slight to severe. Clubbing is often present. The jugular venous pulse may show a dominant V wave, but there is usually no venous engorgement because of capacious right atrium. The precordium is quiet. The first sound is made out, resulting in a single, normally audible first sound. The abnormal tricuspid valve may produce a mid-systolic lick. The second sound is widely split but variable with a soft pulmonic component. A right ventricular third sound and a right atrial fourth sound may be audible. This murmur may be mid-systolic ejection murmur or a loud pansystolic murmur. There is also a short tricuspid delayed diastolic murmur. The combination of sounds, clicks, and murmurs results in a characteristic oscillatory cadence. The electrocardiogram is characteristic in that it shows prominent P waves and right bundle branch block. Characteristically, the R wave in V1 does not exceed 7 mm. Wolff-Parkinson-White type of conduction abnormality may be seen in the ECG. The X-ray shows cardiac enlargement due to right atrial and right ventricular enlargement. The main pulmonary artery segment may be prominent and the aortic knuckle small. Treatment. Surgical treatment consists of obliterating the atrialized portion of the right ventricle and repairing the tricuspid valve. The cone repair of tricuspid valve is increasingly popular for Epstein anomaly. It involves extensive mobilization of the displaced tricuspid annulus and repositioning the valve at the level of the normal annulus. The age for surgical correction is unclear, but there is an increased emphasis on early repair even in the absence of symptoms to enable RV remodeling after surgery. Tachyarrhythmias are common and require antiarrhythmic medication followed by radiofrequency ablation. Now let's try and interpret the third X-ray. This is a plain chest X-ray of a newborn taken in an anteroposterior view. The film appears to be adequately exposed and centered. On assessing the cardiac size, the heart is normal or mildly enlarged, depending on the presence of associated defects. Looking at the cardiac contours, there is a narrow mediastinum, giving the classic egg on a string appearance, where the heart appears egg-shaped and the superior mediastinum is narrowed. The lung fields show increased pulmonary vascularity, indicating increased pulmonary blood flow, which is common in the presence of an associated patent ductus arteriosus or a ventricular septal defect. Putting these findings together, that is, egg-shaped heart, narrow superior mediastinum, and a prominent pulmonary vasculature, the X-ray findings are most probably suggestive of TGA, which is transposition of great arteries. Let's now read this from the textbook. Transposition of great vessels. In transposition of great vessels, TGA, the aorta arises from the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery from the left ventricle. The aorta generally lies anterior and to the right of the pulmonary artery. For this reason, this is also referred to as DTGA. Since the systemic and pulmonary circulations are separate, survival depends on the presence of atrial, ventricular or aortopulmonary communications. TGA is classified into with intact ventricular septum and with VSD. The latter group is further subdivided into cases with and without pulmonary stenosis. Patients with TGA, VSD, and pulmonic stenosis in some ways present like tetralogy physiology, except that they have more intense cyanosis. In patients with TGA, oxygenated pulmonary venous blood recirculates in the lungs, whereas systemic venous blood recirculates in the systemic circulation. The pulmonary artery saturation is thus always higher than the aortic saturation. Survival depends on the mixing between these two circulations. In patients with intact ventricular septum, the best mixing site is the atrial communication. Generally, the atrial communication is the patent foramen ovale, and this being small, the mixing is very poor. Neonates become symptomatic due to severe hypoxemia soon after birth. Presence of a VSD or adequate size improves mixing. As the fetal pulmonary vasculature regresses, the pulmonary blood flow increases and results in congestive failure. Around 4 to 10 weeks of age, the failing left ventricle as well as the markedly increased pulmonary blood flow increases the left atrial pressure with resultant pulmonary venous hypertension. Those who survive the heart failure often develop pulmonary vascular obstructive disease, Eisenmenger physiology, relatively earlier in life. Clinical features. Patients of complete TGA with intact ventricular septum are cyanotic at birth. Since the interatrial communication results in poor mixing, the neonates present with a rapid breathing and congestive failure secondary to hypoxemia within the first few days of life. Physical examination shows severe cyanosis, congestive failure, normal first sound, single second sound, and an insignificant grade 1 to 2 ejection systolic murmur. The electrocardiogram shows right axis deviation, right ventricular hypertrophy. The thoracic Roentgenogram, that is X-ray, shows cardiomegaly with a narrow base and a plethoric lung fields. The cardiac silhouette can have an egg-on-side appearance. The thymic shadow is often absent. Patients of TGA with VSD have increased pulmonary blood flow. Mixing at the ventricular level determines the severity of cyanosis. They develop congestive failure around 4 to 10 weeks of age. Physical findings consist of cyanosis, cardiomegaly, congestive failure, normal first sound, single or normally split second sound, and grade 2 to 4 ejection systolic murmur. Apical third sound gallop or mid-diastolic rumble may be present. Electrocardiogram shows right axis deviation with biventricular right ventricular left ventricular hypertrophy. Chest X-ray shows cardiomegaly, plethoric lung fields, and features of pulmonary venous hypertension. Treatment. Prostaglandin E1 can help reduce cyanosis in selected cases by keeping the PDA open. Interim palliation can be accomplished through a balloon atrial septostomy. This procedure can be accomplished in catheterization laboratory or in the ICU under echocardiographic guidance. Septostomy is successful only up to the age of 6 to 12 weeks and gives temporary relief by providing better mixing and reducing left atrial pressure. The arterial switch operation is now well established as a treatment of choice for TGA, and most centers endeavor to offer this procedure for all infants with TGA. In this operation, the pulmonary artery and aorta are transected. The distal aorta is anastomosed to the proximal pulmonary stump and the pulmonary artery to the proximal aortic stump. The coronary arteries are moved along the neo-aortic route along with a cuff of aortic tissue, allowing suturing without compromising the coronary blood flow. Most modern pediatric cardiac centers strive to achieve excellence with the neonatal arterial switch operation because the long-term results are very satisfying. There is a limited window of time for performing the arterial switch for TGA. Infants with TGA and intact septum should ideally undergo this procedure. Within the first 4 weeks of life, as pulmonary vascular resistance falls after birth, the left ventricle regresses rapidly. In the first 1 to 2 months, the left ventricle has the ability to adjust to the elevated systemic vascular resistance after the arterial switch through hyperplasia of the available muscle. After this, it is difficult for left ventricle to adapt to an arterial switch. Later in infancy, the atrial switch operation, that is Senning operation, may be considered for TGA with intact ventricular septum. This is not an ideal long-term option because the right ventricle remains as a systemic ventricle for life. Over time, the right ventricle dysfunction and severe tricuspid regurgitation sets in. Additionally, extensive restructuring of atria predisposes to atrial rhythm disturbances. Alternatively, the left ventricle may be trained over 1 to 2 weeks through a ductal stenting or pulmonary artery band with a BT shunt, and arterial switch may then be performed. In the presence of a sizable PDA or a VSD, there is no fear of early regression of LV because the PA pressures are elevated. Nevertheless, the window of time for operation of TGA VSD and TGA PDA is still limited. This is because there is accelerated development of pulmonary vascular obstructive disease in these patients. Surgical correction involves the arterial switch operation with closure of the VSD or PDA. This should ideally be accomplished within 2 to 3 months of age. Beyond this age, an increasing proportion of infants show irreversible changes in the pulmonary vasculature. Consequently, post-operative recovery may be complicated by pulmonary hypertensive crisis and long-term results are unsatisfactory. Most centers seek to operate these infants in the first month itself. Many centers are able to perform arterial switch operations with operator mortality of less than 3%. 20-year survival is more than 90%. Long-term concerns after surgery include development of aortic root dilation and aortic regurgitation, right ventricular outflow tract obstruction, and coronary artery occlusion. Corrected TGA. In corrected TGA, the right atrium is connected to the left ventricle and vice versa. The left ventricle gives rise to the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle to the aorta. The aorta lies anterior and to the left of the pulmonary artery, hence the term LTGA. The ascending aorta forms the left upper border of the cardiac silhouette. Since the route of blood flow is normal, it is the associated anomalies that determine the clinical features. The commonest anomalies include a VSD with or without pulmonary stenosis, left-sided Epstein anomaly of the tricuspid valve, clinically simulates mitral regurgitation, and atrioventricular conduction abnormalities including complete atrioventricular block, each in approximately 65% cases. The precordial leads V4R, V1 and V2 may show a Q, capital Q wave that is absent in the left precordial leads. Chest X-ray shows a smooth left upper border corresponding to the ascending aorta. The diagnosis depends on echocardiographic identification of ventricular inversion as well as the additional anomalies. Management depends on the type of associated anomalies. The need to retain the morphologic left ventricle as the systemic ventricle makes the surgical management of corrected transposition rather complex. So that's a wrap for this set of pediatric heart X-rays. Crazy how the heart can change shape in ways that tell such a clear story, right? Each X-ray has its own little secret. And once you start noticing them, it's like solving a mini puzzle every time. Stick around for part 2. There are even more cool heart patterns waiting to be discovered. You won't want to miss it. Thank you. Bye.